The latest fight over former special counsel Jack Smith's classified documents report has become one of the most consequential legal and political controversies in the United States, raising deep questions about transparency, executive power, judicial authority, and public trust. At the heart of this controversy is US District Judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee in Florida whose multiple rulings have effectively withheld key portions of Smith's findings from the public, thrusting the legal system into a debate over who controls information about investigations into a former president. Smith's final report, completed before his resignation in January 2025, was structured in two volumes. One focused on efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, and the other dedicated to the investigation into the handling of classified documents at former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. But while the volume on election interference was eventually released after a lengthy legal battle, the classified documents volume remains sealed under court order, making it one of the most talked about topics in American political news right now. The issue first emerged when the Department of Justice, under Attorney General Merrick Garland, made routine moves to circulate parts of Smith's report to Congress and ideally to publish restricted portions publicly, following the tradition that special counsel reports, while investigatory, should ultimately be transparent to maintain oversight and democratic accountability. However, Judge Cannon blocked that path in a series of orders, emphasizing concerns about ongoing legal rights of Trump and his erstwhile co defendants, Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira, and asserting that releasing the report prematurely could prejudice those individuals' rights, even though the classified prosecution itself had been dismissed after Trump's 2024 electoral victory, and the Justice Department had ceased its appeal of Cannon's dismissal of the charges. In January 2025, Cannon issued a preliminary injunction preventing the DOJ from disseminating or publishing the classified documents report until 3 days after the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals rules on the appeal, a timetable that effectively extended the secrecy well into early 2026. More recently, Cannon's order set a specific deadline of February 24, 2026, before which the department cannot release or circulate the classified volume, a timeline that many legal observers see as providing Trump with a procedural path to delay disclosure indefinitely through appellate maneuvering, a result that critics fear undermines transparency while supporters hail it as a necessary protection of due process for defendants, even absent active prosecutions. This judicial intervention has sparked fierce debate inside both legal and political circles in Washington and across the whole country. On one side are civil liberties advocates, watchdog groups such as American Oversight and the Knight First Amendment Institute, and mainstream news editorial boards who argue that the public has a right to know the factual underpinnings of Smith's investigations, particularly given their historical significance and the fact that the criminal classification charges were never adjudicated on the merits. They point to the fact that special counsel reports are traditionally shared with Congress and were appropriate with the public after redactions to protect genuinely sensitive material, saying that withholding the volume entirely sets a concerning precedent that could shield powerful actors from scrutiny. If you look on the other side, supporters of Cannon's rulings, including many Republican lawmakers and legal conservatives, argue that the traditional mechanisms for special counsel reporting are not absolute rights, but rather conventions that must be balanced against the rights of targets or subjects in investigations, including the presumption of fairness and the avoidance of prejudicial disclosure before all legal avenues are exhausted. They assert that Cannon's rulings are consistent with ensuring that executive branch investigations do not become the de facto tools of political weaponization, especially when they involve high profile public figures and unresolved legal questions. Some have also criticized the Department of Justice for what they describe as permissive public posture and for not vigorously contesting Cannon's rulings, raising broader questions about prosecutorial strategy and the allocation of institutional authority between district courts and appellate courts. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump and his legal team have publicly welcomed the continued secrecy, framing the fight as one more chapter in what they describe as politically motivated investigations targeting him unfairly. Trump allies argue that releasing Smith's classified documents report, especially if it contains untested factual assertions, would unfairly tarnish his reputation and disrupt his administration's agenda after his 2024 election win. That position, however, complicates efforts by some congressional Republicans who have expressed interest in reviewing the report's findings behind closed doors. Since grand jury secrecy rules and Cannon's orders restrict even classified inter-branch access until the appellate process runs its course, the controversy over the classified documents report is not occurring in isolation, but against the backdrop of ongoing legal debates about the role and power of special counsels, the constitutional limits of executive privilege, and the interplay between judicial discretion and public accountability. Critiques of Cannon's rulings note that the prolonged delays, described by at least one appeals panel as undue delay, highlight tensions between judicial overreach and democratic transparency. And some legal scholars argue that prolonged secrecy on matters of significant public interest undermines citizen trust in the justice system. Supporters of Cannon, conversely, emphasize the importance of the due process and the need to protect legal rights even for unpopular individuals, even if that's Trump, even if that is an unpopular individual, arguing that the appearance of transparency can never override constitutional guarantees. Public reaction to the developments has been intense and divided. On social media platforms and commentary shows, users and pundits have debated whether courts should act as gatekeepers, preventing political narratives from shaping public opinion prior to legal resolution, or whether courts should respect long standing conventions of public access to investigatory reports once prosecutorial actions are concluded. Some legal analysts have pointed out that special counsel reports are not the same as indictments. They often contain factual summaries, legal reasoning, and recommendations that are meant to be used both by Congress and by the public to understand the government's reasoning and decisions. Keeping a volume wholly sealed when no charges are currently pending is remarkable by historical standards. Congressional leaders on both sides have also weighed in. Some of the Democrats, you can say, have called for the report's release as a matter of accountability, asserting that Smith's work, even if it did not lead the indictment, still represents a significant chapter in understanding presidential conduct and national security considerations. Some Republicans have expressed mixed views, with a few favoring review within classified settings for lawmakers, but supporting Cannon's broader position against public dissemination without due process evaluation, illustrating the party's ongoing internal division over how to handle Trump related legal matters. All eyes are now on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which will have to decide whether canon's interpretation of procedural rules and secrecy protections stands, whether clear precedents exist or must be set affirmatively, and whether parts or all of Smith's report should be unsealed once legal appeals are resolved. The timing of these decisions could reverberate through the 2026 midterm elections and beyond, shaping how future special counsel investigations are handled and how the American public perceives the balance between justice and secrecy. The legal battle over the classified documents report is therefore far more than a technical skirmish. It has become a symbol of the broader struggle over transparency, accountability, and the rule of law in a deeply polarized polity, with Judge Cannon's rulings at the forefront of a debate that may define public understanding of Trump's legal legacy long after the courts have issued their final opinions. As the nation watches, this case remains a living test of constitutional balance, institutional power, and ultimately how an open society should manage information that touches on both national security and the conduct of its highest officials. And so, for now, the report remains sealed, the facts locked behind court orders and appeals, while the political and legal fallout continues to grow. Whether this silence protects due process or undermines transparency will ultimately be decided by higher courts and by history itself. One thing is certain. The fight over Jack Smith's report is no longer just about classified documents. It is about power, accountability, and who controls the narrative in America's most consequential legal battles.